Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 15, Episode 106. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Monday, Steelers Nation. Dave, relatively quiet weekend, remain on quarterback watch, but got a new addition to the Pittsburgh Steelers roster late Sunday night, and finally Pittsburgh getting some help along the defensive line after making some subtractions with Larry Ogunjobi, Isaiah Loudermilk remaining a free agent. They have made an addition in former New England Patriot defensive lineman Daniel Ekuale. We'll talk about him, talk about some other NFL and Steelers sort of adjacent news this weekend. Going to have to face Jamar Chase and T. Higgins for a long time in Cincinnati as the Bengals lock up both two massive contracts. Dave, how you doing? How's your weekend? And a very happy St. Patrick's Day to you.
Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day to you and the listeners as well. Weekend was nice. I actually watched a little bit of here and there of some these conference championship basketball games and trying to get as ready as I can to see if I can win the Steelers Depot bracket contest this year. I think didn't I win it last year? I think I did. I can't been 365 days is an eternity to me now at this stage, but yeah, we've got a couple of things to actually talk about. Some interesting news. The Steelers must have read my tweet the other day recapping the state of the defensive line as far as players currently under contract heading in, coming out of the weekend there. And they have not officially announced the move yet of Aquali, but his agency did. So I would suspect that as soon as he gets in there and takes a physical and all, which probably today, that will be made official here at some point. I don't believe they've announced Ben Skoranek or Scotty Miller officially yet, have they? And
No.
so those are probably going to all come at the same time there. We're still waiting on a lot of these contracts to get filed with the NFLPA to get some more specifics on them. I think we got a total value of the Ben Skoranek deal, which surprisingly came in over minimum value, but waiting to hear the financials on that. Scotty Miller, we think we know the Mason Rudolph deal, but we need to get the specifics on that. I think the Eckel contract we're waiting on. One more in there somewhere. I think there was just finality on what I think the Darius Slay thing was, which should be easy at $10 million.
Yeah, we don't know the particulars on really any deal. Like the Metcalf deal, we don't even know the details on that year by year, correct?
Right. In fact, just still using him at that $18 million placeholder for the salary that transferred over from the Seahawks. But we should know that sometime this week as well, too. So, I can only give a rough estimation of where they are cap wise right now. And by the way, there seems to be a narrative floating around that the Steelers will need to be creative with their salary cap space moving forward to get a quarterback like, let's say, Aaron Rodgers under contract. That couldn't be further from the truth. And especially, if they do something with, 2 or more years there, because people forget that is where, if they're going off of where they think the cap, where the cap number is right now for the Steelers, remember that the DK Metcalf $18 million cap hit that's serving as a placeholder really right now is probably going to come down. It could come down about $8 or $9 or $10 million, depending on how they structure this thing. And then you got to remember that a TJ Watt contract extension at some point this offseason is going to bring his cap number down as well. So, this team is really exactly where I thought they would be kind of cap wise at this point. And there's really, even though they've eaten up quite a bit of it with some large contracts, like a 1-year deal for Darius Slay at $10 million, mean, they're operating just fine, and if anything, it's going to be interesting to track where they look at where they are from a cash perspective. As soon as we know the details of the DK Metcalf deal and whatever quarterback they finally come to terms with here, you would think sooner rather than later.
And really no update over the weekend on quarterback situation. Aaron Rodgers, as we mentioned late Friday's show, he was at a charity flag football game, but I don't believe he spoke to the media, and so there's really no commentary to be had there. The Giants are hosting Jameis Winston for a visit, so they continue to kick the tires on potential alternatives. Maybe you interpret that as a signal they aren't incredibly confident they're going to land Aaron Rodgers. Reporting is a mixed bag on Minnesota. The general consensus seems to be that Minnesota is probably not going to pursue Aaron Rodgers, but no final decision appears to have been made there. And of course, Rodgers himself has not made a decision either. So I don't want to spend much more time on quarterback talk today, but essentially the news is there is no news.
Exactly, and until there is no news, or it's all going to be speculation. And I'll say this: the fact that Michael Silver attached his name to kind of those reports over the weekend from the Athletic is, Michael Silver's pretty damn good at his job overall. Of all those people over there at the Athletic and all, I mean, he's a bigger name guy now, and he's been in business and been in the business for quite a bit of while there. And if it was just Diana Rossini's name attached to it, and forget who the other name that was attached, they had three reporters attached to that report about Rodgers in Minnesota. I give it a little bit more credence that Michael Silver's attached his name to it. But I mean, fact of the matter is, and I think it's been reported several times that Aaron Rodgers keeps things very, very close to the vest and all. And we've seen the spats in the past with him and Schefter, and he does a good job of controlling his leaks, I think, overall. And I think there was a picture of him and Will Blackman at that charity football game, along with obviously several other NFL players. I'm betting that he didn't let the cat out of the bag as far as which way he's leaning there. So until something, he seems to potentially be the big domino in the log jam, or the big log in the log jam, if you will, at this point, because obviously you still got Russell Wilson out there, and Jameis is looking for work, and who else is looking for work still? I
mean, if there was any traction on the Kirk Cousins situations, we
Right.
should actually note, by the way, to your credit, the Falcons did roster Cousins over the weekend. That locks in a $10 million bonus for 2026. And so the Falcons said they were going to keep him, said they were going to be willing to eat that money, and they are. So they now have some flexibility. And if you want Kirk Cousins, you're going to have to trade for him.
Yeah, and overall, the deeper you get into this thing, that is the wisest thing for Atlanta to do, because that bonus
Is it?
it is because of the fact that roster bonus does not come due until next offseason. The main thing with the March 17th date is it became fully guaranteed. All right. So if you deal him before having to pay that out, whatever team acquires him goes on the hook for that money there with him. So I thought Mike Mayock on the Dan Patrick show, and I came across that right after I wrote my post on it last week, did the best job of kind of laying out why the Falcons should maintain control, because obviously if they cut him outright, they get nothing for him, right? And like it or not, Cousins still has some market value to him at this point. So merely holding on to him past the March 17th trigger date isn't a big deal overall for them, especially with their other quarterback, Penix, being on a rookie contract. So worst case scenario is, yes, you have to carry that large base salary of his and cap hit throughout the 2025 season. You got an experienced backup to Penix, so you continue to mentor him. Now, I think Cousins has had the meeting with Arthur Blank, says, hey, man, I'd really like to get out of here, but and go start somewhere else. But the Falcons have got to do what's best for the Falcons there. So if you're a team trading, looking hard at Cousins, even the $10 million being fully guaranteed of the roster bonus isn't a huge albatross, if you will, because let's say you trade for Cousins, you play him, he starts, he doesn't have a great season, he's not worth the $35 million base salary in 2026, then you just cut him before you pay him that money. Now you're on the hook still for that $10 million fully guaranteed, but that's going to be subject to offsets. And I'm willing to venture that should Kirk Cousins be cut anytime next off season, that he would end up signing for more than $10 million
You
somewhere.
think if he has another bad year and he's another year older and he's clearly not recovered 2 years out from the Achilles, and he's probably just done at that point. I just, is it worth?
Well, let's say he signed for $6 million. All right. Well, then that helps alleviate that, some of that. It helps offset that some of that 10 million there. So
Sure, but he may be retired at that point because
sure.
if he can't do it 2 years in a row out off the injury and no one views him as a viable starting quarterback, then he's just cooked and he can go off and retire and go count his money there. It just, if you're Atlanta, and I know I said we wouldn't talk quarterback, and here we are talking quarterback, but if you're Atlanta, is it worth getting whatever you may end up getting for him? A day 3 selection is probably his value right now. Is that worth it compared to the distraction, this hostages, not volunteers mentality of let's have this disgruntled quarterback who doesn't want to be here? That's a media story as our backup to our franchise young quarterback. Is that really worth it to get a 5th round pick maybe in the end for Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, I mean, any draft picks more than what you're going to get for him in the first place. Now, here's the other thing along with it. I still would think that any team that's trying to potentially maybe trade for Kirk Cousins this offseason now is probably going to still try to go at Atlanta and try to get them to eat some of that base salary this season of 20 something million, because it's quite a hard number for a team at this point. The remaining teams at this point that would potentially be in a market for them to kind of swallow. So as part of the negotiation of Atlanta potentially eating some of this large base salary that Kirk Cousins had this year, it's going to increase to some degree whatever the compensation is. So maybe it ends up being a 4th or a third or a low 3rd round pick. Because remember, you're also trading the fact that he's under control for a couple more years past this season,
but
should it end up hitting for whatever team. So there's that aspect of it too. Look, this is where I'm at on Kirk Cousins. I think he still gets dealt at some point this offseason. I would not be surprised if they end up eating a little bit of that salary and end up getting, let's say, a 4th round pick out of it. If that's what happens, and it happens before this team gets into OTAs and training camp, where maybe you get a little bit of the disgruntledness distraction or whatnot, then I think they have benefited their organization.
I do agree that trading Cousins before really the draft is the best case scenario, because then that's going to minimize the distraction. You're never together as a team in that moment where you have these questions and this big media storyline that's going to suck up all the oxygen in the offseason. And you're right, if Rodgers signs, dominoes should fall and there probably will be some movement on the Cousins front. I don't know. It just feels like a lot of money to eat. Feels like a lot of stubbornness to get a little bit out of a situation where this guy wants to leave. He made a mistake. You cut him, you move on, you wipe your hands clean of it, is what I would have done. But obviously I was wrong, and Atlanta is going to stick to their guns.
And once again, that 10 million does not, they don't have to pay it until it's come time to do. No, now
but the acquiring team has to be on the hook for that if he gets traded.
Right. But
year.
10 million, I mean, like a 10, let's say it's just flat out you miss and you have to eat $10 million in dead money. How big is that? We've seen teams take these massive dead money hits as of late on players. $10 million in today's salary cap world is a drop in a bucket.
Sure.
I mean,
it's just another issue for a trading team to acquire him, to know we may pay $10 million for this garbage bomb next
Sure,
year.
sure, but I mean, you're also, I mean, and there's not many teams left now to potentially be in the market for him. So it you know, I overall I think it's a smart move by the Falcons, and we're not going to know for sure until when and if they. And once again, you're probably going to, if you did deal him, uh. And got the best compensation, it would probably be before the draft. But I mean, you could even get, let's say the Falcons get into the season. They have to carry Kirk Cousins into the season, and let's say they get to the trade deadline, and things aren't going well. Then maybe you dump them for a seventh round draft pick, and whatever team acquires them, would probably be a team thinking, maybe had a quarterback injury or
Mhm.
whatnot, and needing a veteran guy to maybe get them into the playoffs or whatnot, and at the risk of potentially eating $10 million. So it's not just, you're holding on. It's controlling potential whatever remaining value you have on him at a potential cost of 10 million. And once again, I think I think that long and short, we're going to look back at this over the next couple of months of, hey, Atlanta did the right thing there.
Let me bring this to Pittsburgh as a last thought in terms of competition and compensation, because it's a really good point. Let's just map some stuff out for the sake of argument. That Rodgers goes to the Giants, Russ goes to the Browns. Just hypothetically, Pittsburgh is left holding the bag. Cousins now looks like their best option. Who is their competition to trade for him?
Maybe Tennessee. I thought about maybe Tennessee.
I mean, they
Uh,
would have a need. They had the number one overall pick. They're likely to take Cam Ward. So I mean, they're going to probably want a veteran at some point. I don't think it'll be Cousins. So if you're Pittsburgh, you just offer a bottom level draft pick for Cousins, not that third or fourth round pick, and say, Atlanta, we have no other bidders, so you want to trade him to us and for a 6th round pick or not. So
I
there's lack of competition that hurts his compensation.
Right, but and it also hurts maybe the negotiation on Atlanta side of potentially, like I said, having to eat a little bit of that 20-something million
Right.
salary that Cousins had. But still, you're going to get some compensation out of that as far as a draft pick, whether it be this year or next year, whereas you would have got nothing by just throwing them out, putting them on the side of the street right now.
Sure, but now you're eating. If you have to eat money in a negotiation, there's that factor too. There's a financial cost. There's a potential distraction cost if this thing drags on. The only leverage Atlanta would have if Pittsburgh were to offer, bottom dollar for him would say, you guys need a quarterback. Stop messing around. Give us a good pick because you need a quarterback and need to get this guy in your building right away to get him in your program and have finality there. So that would be a little bit of leverage play Atlanta would have because Pittsburgh would have no other options besides going with Rudolph or some other veteran competition. But anyway, I mean that you
Go
were right.
go go
They kept
go listen. Go listen to what Mike Mayock
okay.
said on that brief 2 minutes on the Dan Patrick. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and how he described it. I know Mike Mayock wasn't the best general manager during his short run there with the Raiders and all, but it if you, now that you know more of the specifics or whatnot, if you listen to what maybe you'll have a different opinion coming out of his mouth.
And there's a man that can make me change my mind. It is Mike Mayock. I've always been a huge fan of him. All right, Dave, let's get past the quarterback talk here. Let's talk about Daniel Ekuale, signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. We don't know exact contract details. Can't imagine it'll be a terribly big contract. 1 to 2 years for a couple million is probably what it's going to come in at. Honestly, Dave, I'll be 100% honest. Whenever his agency first announced he was signing, I was pretty unfamiliar with the player, but he started 16 games for the Patriots last year, had been a practice squatter for a large part of his career, a backup playing snaps here and there, missed most of 2023 with a torn bicep, but then got back, got healthy, and cracked the lineup in 2024. So some defensive line depth and somebody, to me, we have a complete tape breakdown on Daniel Ekuale this morning on Steelers Depot. He's a good base run defender. The pass rush will be minimal, but I think he's a pretty stout guy against the run.
Yeah, this is a guy that really overall hasn't played a lot of snaps for a guy that's been in the league since 2019. He has 1,643 career defensive snaps at this point. I believe a former undrafted free agent, right? Out of Washington State, had that injury in 2023, rebounded, and obviously, who was it? Barrymore, I think, or something, went down for the Patriots last year, and that caused Ekuale to get a lot of snaps played, and he ended up. It wasn't hard for him to have a career season based on his other playing time and seasons and all like that. But he went on, he did have a career season for him as far as total tackles. Only had one sack, though, had a couple of TFLs, just a handful of quarterback hits. The tape, the all 22 that there were some cut-ups already for games against the Dolphins and the Jaguars on Twitter that were very easy to find last night on that. So I watched a little bit of that there. And I think the thing that stuck out to me the most is this is a guy that can help you against the run. I think his tape last year against the run was noticeably better than Larry Ogunjobi's run tape. Now, the Larry Ogunjobi run tape last year wasn't a high bar to clear, in my opinion, but a good guy that can play, that mostly played in the B gap, or over the tackle, and then a little bit outside the tackle there. Not very many snaps in the A gap overall, but he has played up and down the defensive line throughout his throughout his career. But if you were to base what the player is just off of last year, then you have yourself a pretty decent run defender and one that can play up and down the defensive line as well. And that was one of my main takeaways with him.
They asked Aquali to often play on the strong side of the formation, even to occasionally go so far to shift him as the offense motioned and changed their strength. And you don't see that too often. And so he was not 100% of the time, but often their strong side defensive end to the run side of the formation. And so that kind of tells you what they thought about his run defense. You're right. He's more base defensive end. He's not nose tackle. So he's going to play that 3-tech, 4-eye, occasional 5-tech outside shade on the offensive tackle. He's an old school 2-gapper. He's not going to be the 1-gapper. You're right. His run defense better than Ogunjobi. I would even classify it better than Isaiah Loudermilk, although compared to Ogunjobi, there are different styles of play. Ogunjobi's more 1-gapping, upfield kind of a guy. Aquali's the old school 2-gapper, take on blocks, control the point of attack, stack and shed, and spill runs to the outside. And so he struggles on perimeter runs. Those zone runs can hurt him. A lack of length hurts him as well, sub 32-inch arms. And so he's a guy that can kind of get chest to chest and lose vision on the football. He lacks that great first step to be able to flow down the line on zone schemes, can get reached by backside guards and tackles. But in those interior runs, between the tackles, when he's got to hold the point of attack, he does that pretty darn well. And so this is, to me, base defensive end, not a lot of sub package work for him. He should be low in that totem pole behind Hayward, Benton, the assumed rookie that will come in, maybe even Montravius Adams, who's a much better athlete than Aquali, a better first step. But he is somebody who's strong and stout overall against those interior runs in Pittsburgh. Certainly needs that based on how last year ended.
This is a guy that you could throw out there at an end at one of the 2 end positions, early rundown type situations, especially early in the season. Now, his signing does absolutely nothing to what draft plans and all like that. Look, they sent Larry Ogunjobi, and we'll talk about Larry Ogunjobi more here in a minute here, but they sent Larry Ogunjobi packing. They will still have to find out what happens with Isaiah Loudermilk here, because as he's an unsigned, unrestricted free agent, even if you re-sign a guy like Isaiah Loudermilk on top of this and adding Equale, it does really nothing overall to what your potential draft plans would be. We've seen the Steelers like to close up kind of known holes with kind of mid-tier players, if you will, prior to draft, just so they don't totally pigeon themselves into an automatic hole at a position in the draft. But all that said, I'm still expecting nothing that happened here has led me to believe that the highest potential would be this team still drafting a defensive lineman in the first round at 21 overall, especially as we sit here right now with this team not having a second round pick. The onus was from Art Rooney that they've got to get better against the run, got to be better in the trenches. If you want to think of this as a 1-for-1 run stopping situation of swapping Larry Ogunjobi for Daniel Ekuale, well, then it's a step up. It's not massive, but it is a step up nonetheless. And you got better, I think, 1-for-1 in run stopping when it comes to Larry Ogunjobi versus Daniel Aquali.
Agreed. I think that's the emphasis and the focus on the Aquali signing. While they could potentially re-sign and bring back Isaiah Loudermilk, and I agree this does not change their draft plans at all. This at the least is a replacement for Loudermilk in terms of backup, base defensive end, a couple of sub-package snaps here and there. At worst, that's going to be the role Aquale has. Now, if you bring in a rookie and he's not fully there to play a bunch of snaps week one, then Aquale can probably be also your base left defensive end, and those 25% of snaps you're going to play in your 3-4, and he'll see an uptick there, and then potentially reduce that role throughout the season as the rookie gets proven up to speed as he earns the coaching staff's trust. But that's kind of the role, I think, ideally for Aquale this year. He was a full-time starter last year, played over 700 snaps. It's probably a little too much, but if he's that Loudermilk in that role and a better version of him as a pass rusher, he's got active hands and tight hips is kind of how I frame him. Not going to impact the game there. Probably maybe a tick better than Loudermilk as a pass rusher, but similar outcomes. But that's kind of where I see the replacement for Loudermilk.
Yeah, if he doesn't win early and if he has to go around, look, he can still twist and stunt and all, right? But if he's a guy that has to part of his counter to win around the edge, it's going to take. He's not the most nimble of feet kind of guy in doing so, and he's got balance issues when he starts moving laterally on top of it. He's a straightforward. Can he win off the snap as a pass rusher and win that way? And once, like you said, he played a little over 700 snaps. That was obviously a career high for him. Damn, I mean, you look at his total snaps, almost 1,650 almost for his career. He logged almost half of those last season. You don't want to get in a situation where he, plays another 700 snaps for you. He's probably a 300 snap type player for you for the Steelers.
What was Loudermilk's snap count last year? Because they were pretty healthy overall, and so in an ideal world, you probably want Aquale to mirror what Loudermilk had. Let me pull it up here. 222, probably a tick above will be okay for Aquale. So I think like you said, that 350 snap range for Aquale, assuming maybe more snaps early in the season as that rookie gets assimilated in, would make sense. Should mention, by the way, they're not getting any younger on the defensive line. Aquale is 31 years old. Now, he's kind of got fresh tires because, as you said, he's barely played throughout his career and missed all of 2023 or almost all of 2023 with that torn bicep. But this is not a youth movement that'll, again, come in the draft, but it does get you that depth.
And we don't know the length of the deal and obviously no financials. It's either going to be a 1 or a 2-year deal, I think, with him. And people are saying, well, what does this do to the compensatory value process? I can't imagine, Alex, this is going to be an expensive contract at all. And I'm not expecting it to impact the compensatory value sheet. Like canceling anybody out. But, I also didn't think that Ben Skronik would be anything more than a veteran benefit contract. And, it ended up being a little bit more expensive there. But I can't imagine where this is going to be an expensive deal here.
Agreed. It's not. We don't know particulars, but 1 to 2 years. I don't know what the money is. $3 million per year is kind of the number in my head, but a cheap contract.
Right.
Any other thoughts there on Daniel Ekuale? I'm fine with the signing. It's the first move of several to come, and again, that big swing is going to come, as you said, likely in round 1 of the draft.
Right. And look, it still doesn't prevent this team from maybe even double dipping at defensive line spot, depending on how things go there. Ideally, you want this rookie to come in and make a guy like Equale kind of, a potential for in active sheet later on as the season goes, depending on health of the team and all like that. But at least at the very least, you got a guy that look at this just one for one, like you said, with either Loudermilk or maybe potentially Ogunjobi. Is he a better run defender than both those two? And the answer is yes.
How does he compare to Dean Lowry? We always kind of forget Lowry's still on this team, even though he spent last year as inactive.
Yeah, Dean Lowry at this point now is going to be very lucky to make the 53-man roster if everybody stays healthy.
Agreed. I think it's an upgrade over Lowry.
Right.
All right, let's talk about Larry Ogunjobi since you mentioned him and stay with this time a former Steelers defensive lineman. We talked about him finding a new home in Buffalo, getting a contract that seemed to be a little more than expected, 1 year over $8 million. In Buffalo, probably are regretting that contract right now. Ogunjobi suspended 6 games by the NFL for violating the PED policy. The Bills say they did not know that suspension was going to happen until after they had agreed to terms, and so they're going to have to power through. They had 2 players actually suspended by the NFL for PED violations. Michael Hoyt of the Rams also getting popped 6 games. So not looking great for Buffalo, and Pittsburgh's decision to release Ogunjobi, although I think pretty obvious, looks all the better.
Yeah, and I think somebody is in the email machine wanting us to put the tinfoil hat on and say, well, would Larry Ogunjobi still? Did the Steelers know about this potential suspension ahead of time and said, well, the heck with it, and cut him? In other words, would Larry Ogunjobi still be under contract with this team with that roster bonus being paid at this point? If they, did not know about this. So it's impossible to answer that question. My thought all along that Larry Ogunjobi was going to be out the door before that roster bonus is paid. Now, I don't know how and when all this testing happens. I'm guessing that anytime a player joins a new team, I don't know when the league knew or didn't know. Do they find out when these guys have to pee in a cup when they go into a new building? Is that when this sort of thing happens? Did the Steelers know about this ahead of time? I don't know. I just don't know enough about how that process works. And is there potential the Steelers maybe knew that this was coming with the suspension? Just said, well, that makes the decision that much easier. I can't say that that's not a plausible aspect to this.
I guess the question would be, if Pittsburgh knew, how did Buffalo not know? I don't know how notification exactly works, if the NFL informs just the player, if they informed the team, and if, Ogunjobi was a free agent and he got informed. There was no team to inform, but the Bills say they did not know about this, and this all happened after he signed, I guess immediately after that he signed or agreed to terms on a 1-year deal. So until I have evidence that they did know, then I'll assume they did not, and that decision to cut him was solely financial and football related.
Does Larry sign the contract and say, oh, by the way, I got something I got to tell you?
The next day, oh, I forgot, by the way.
Oh, there's little bit of I forgot. There's this little minor detail here. Well, here's the thing, too, with that contract. Obviously, Larry Ogunjobi will lose game checks. And
does that have the salary cap? Do they get recompensated salary cap-wise?
Yeah. They get, they get credited that. I think they tick that off by game. It gets credited back by game, but they will get, they don't have to pay the cash to them for those games. And then B, they get credited back that, and look, they get a fully healthy Larry Ogunjobi once he gets up and running and all like that. But and I don't know. I didn't look at his contract. I can't imagine Larry Ogunjobi had guarantees. What is his? contract say
It
here?
was 1 year, I think 8.3. So I guess effectively they'll probably end up paying out, I don't know, what the proration is, 5 million or so,
Right.
given the 6-game suspension there. So
Right.
yeah.
The only way it becomes back to a Steelers conversation on this show is, I guess, the fact that the one listener brought up is wondering if the Steelers knew about it or not, and if that played into the decision. And we'll never know the answer to that question, I don't think.
Does that factor compensatory value because of the suspension? Or is it still treated as the full contract because that's just the
Well,
easier
he
way to
was
do it?
cut, so
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm sorry because somebody asked about that. I apologize. Yeah, he was cut, so Pittsburgh wouldn't get any
right,
credit for that.
right. He's cut, so
Good
once
point.
he goes to the street, there's no compensatory value there.
I just wonder, I guess, in a general sense, if there ever was a situation where a player was truly lost and then suspended, does that impact the compensation? I know it potentially could from a snap count perspective, which is one component of how the formula is created. But from a value monetary standpoint, do you get dinged for that because of the
I think you
suspension hit?
absolutely do. Yeah, I
You
think you
do.
absolutely
Okay.
do.
Interesting, interesting. All right, so that's the deal on Ogunjobi. So no one sad to see Pittsburgh make a move and hopefully get stronger at defensive lineman post Ogunjobi. All right, Dave, where to from here? Let's stick with defensive lineman for one more topic. Pittsburgh, and we don't know all the details of it, and it's just kind of a comment from we're a fan of him, Brian Baldinger, good analyst for NFL Network. He had made a comment, I forget the exact context, but to talk to some Steelers personnel member, we don't know who, and said, are you going to be at the Penn State Pro Day? Got some prospects there, and they said, no, we're going to go to Ole Miss to check out Walter Nolan, and the Ole Miss defensive lineman. There's also Jared Ivey there, but certainly Nolan's going to be the top Ole Miss defensive line prospect, and so we don't know exactly who all will be there and who that personnel member was, but Pittsburgh certainly having eyes on that Ole Miss Pro Day, and I should have checked when that Ole Miss Pro Day is, but later this month.
I had the pro day list pulled up a little while ago. When is the Ole Miss Pro Day?
It's a good question, and I
There's
did not
there's
remember.
there's some quarterback over there at Ole Miss too that
Yeah,
will
Jackson Dart, March 28th, one of the last pro days of the cycle.
okay. So when we finally get to that point, and who all is on March 28th? Penn State, Ole Miss, Maryland, Maine, Jacksonville State. So Ole Miss obviously will probably be, well, you got the tight end obviously over at Penn State. That's going to be a draw, and the edge rusher over there. So those are the Ole Miss and the Penn State Pro Days will be the two biggest draws late in the process there. I guess the only question is does Tomlin and Khan both show up at that Ole Miss Pro Day because of not only the defensive lineman but Jackson Dart being there as well.
Sure, that's a great point. And so they're going to send certainly some key personnel. Will Carl Dunbar be at that Ole Miss Pro Day? I think there's a good chance he will to work out those guys. And they only send positional coaches to a couple of pro days each year. But given the talent and the need and the multitude of prospects for Ole Miss, that's going to be notable. And it wouldn't be shocking to see Tomlin go too. The question will be, how much of it is about Nolan? How much of it is about Jackson Dart? It might depend on other quarterback movement. Do they go to do they go to the Louisville Pro Day for Tyler Shuck? Do they go to Colorado for Shadur Sanders? We'll have to wait and see.
All right, and today being the 17th of Monday, looks like I don't know if they list all of them. There are probably some smaller schools going on, but it looks like Arkansas, Northern Illinois, Oregon State, Sam Houston, Syracuse, and UCLA on the docket today. Will we see Tomlin show up at any of those six? I'm betting he's not going to go all the way out to UCLA. Betting he's not going to go to Sam Houston or Oregon State or Northern Illinois. So I guess it leaves Arkansas and Syracuse maybe as two places he could potentially show up at.
I would guess no. I think Syracuse is the most interesting school. They got a ton of good prospects, not necessarily first round guys, but you have multiple guys on offense. Of course, Kyle McCord, the quarterback. I'm a big fan of LaQuint Allen, the running back, really good pass catcher. Gadsden, the tight end, interesting name. Fidel Diggs defensively. So you'll see good representation. I assume it'll be a pretty popular NFL stop today, Syracuse. but I don't think we'll see Tomlin. Or in Arkansas has some talent too. Landon Jackson, their leggy edge rusher, is going to be their top guy.
And Tuesday's pro day circuit, that's going to be an interesting one when it comes to the Steelers brass and all like that, because you got that silly Big 12 pro day going on with all those schools. My hope is, and I know it's yours as well too, that they get that broken back up pretty soon. But the Oregon pro day is on March 18th on Tuesday.
Right. And then is it Alabama the next day?
I just lost my spot. I'll have to relook.
Because I know we talked about a potential schedule conflict, and would they go out? Obviously, they could go to Oregon one day and then fly into Alabama the next day, but we don't know if they would, and they don't often go out west. And so you really want to see if they go to Oregon for Derek Harmon.
Yeah, because he could be in the driver's seat for the 21st overall pick.
Now, Tomlin did not go to Washington's pro day last year. Pat Meyer went, though, correct?
To which one?
To Washington for
Yeah,
Fautanu.
that feels like it's right.
Because he made a West Coast tour of Oregon for Jackson Powers Johnson and Fautanu. So I wonder, will they send Dunbar to Oregon for Harmon and then bring Harmon in for a visit the way they brought in Fautanu for a visit?
And it'll be big news if Tomlin goes past the Mississippi River, right?
Yes. Yes. Manifest destiny has not really existed in Pittsburgh. And so if they do, it is certainly notable. My guess, and it's just a guess, is that they won't, at least he won't go. They'll send people for sure.
Right.
But Tomlin and Khan will not go, especially with the quarterback stuff still going on. They'll be at Bama on Wednesday is my expectation.
Okay. All right.
But will Dunbar go to Oregon? It's the big question I have.
Right. And if I'm betting, I'm saying yes, he does.
Does Oregon have any other defensive line prospects? Caldwell, right? Jamari Caldwell is there. So that's because last year at Washington, it was Rosengarten and Fautanu. So there were multiple position offensive linemen to go check out. And so they got to send Dunbar then for both those guys, I would think. Probably send him to Oregon and then probably go to Ole Miss for Ivy and Nolan would be my guess on the two stops he makes.
I would think so. And when's the Michigan one?
That's a good point. I'm not sure on the date on that one, but is Graham was one of them hurt? Was Graham a little dinged up? That's a good. Maybe they go to Michigan too, but Michigan will certainly have Austin and Tomlin and
a defensive back and Will Johnson and they all almost always are at the Michigan Pro Day.
Right. So we'll certainly be keeping track of that. And yeah, you and me both hoping that Big 12 Pro Day nonsense ends, but unfortunately it's happening for another season and we'll see who's there. But it has been, at least last year was hard to really see if any Steelers scouts were at that event.
All right. And we scoured through the pro days late last week. We did find out from Tony Pauline that Dan Rooney Jr. was at the Georgia Tech pro day. We never spotted him ourselves, at least I haven't. And you told me to look at one other. Was it Baylor? There was another school you wanted me to look at. Try to find that set. Was it? I can't remember.
Colorado State.
Yeah, but there was another school I thought you wanted me to look at. And I couldn't find anybody there. Anyway, sometimes it's 10, 12 days later before some local news footage gets released, and we end up circling back and finding a couple of people there. So maybe that'll be a case. But we'll be looking today and obviously this weekend. Once again, like we said, the Oregon Pro Day, going to be interesting to see who shows up there. And I would imagine it's going to get a lot of coverage with Derek going through the paces there.
We know the call letters for every random news station, mid-market, and we love you, KWFH out there in, I don't know, Wisconsin or whatever. That's our time of year.
All right. Anything else you want to transition to? I've got something here. Go over real quick.
I was going to talk Bengals receivers, but What do you got for me, Dave?
Jerry Dulac says now that he believes the Steelers will only sign a 1-year deal with whatever veteran quarterback they decide to bring in for the 2025 season. He says there's not many options out there for that either, but I do think that that they are comfortable with Mason Rudolph, that if they have to play him, they're okay with that for now, but they're playing long range, whether it's this year or next year, is they're going to go find what they hope is a franchise quarterback. I will tell you that whoever comes in, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or if they do make a deal with make a deal somewhere, they're not going to give up a whole lot, but whoever it is, it's only going to be a 1-year deal. They're not interested in signing any quarterback to a long-term deal. That sounds okay in theory, but obviously it comes down to what the price point is on some of these guys. Now, look, at this point, Russell Wilson's value, at least APY, is probably depressed pretty good at this point. Aaron Rodgers, we had a talk. Is it going to be 35 million? It feels like now Aaron Rodgers probably market value is a little bit depressed now as well too. If you brought one of those guys on a 1-year deal, and if either one of them, let's say, was $20 million, that's quite a salary cap hit to try to fit in under the cap. So I'm going to push back a little bit on this and say I will be surprised if, let's say, Russell Wilson, or let's just narrow it down to those two, Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson. I'll be surprised if either one of those two sign a one-year deal.
Right, at least for cap purposes, 2 years helps make it a little more manageable. And if Rodgers has, or whoever, Wilson has a great season, then you have another quarterback under contract for next year, along with Mason Rudolph, who signed that 2-year deal. And Rodgers reportedly wants to play, at least 2 more years, or at least that is a possibility. So it would make sense to go 2 years for Aaron Rodgers. From that Athletic piece you mentioned, top of the show, the one with Michael Silver, Diana Rossini, they're reporting, and I take all this stuff with a grain of salt when it comes to Rodgers, especially, is that he's looking for Sam Darnold money in terms of average yearly value, not the 3-year deal that Darnold got in Seattle, but around $33 million per season is reportedly the ask from Rodgers.
That feels a little. The further we get into this, it feels a little stiff.
Well, we're only further into this because Rodgers just has to
Right.
decide. There is a market. It's just everyone is waiting on him. So contract does not seem to be the hang up. It just seems to be Rodgers deciding where he wants to play, or if Minnesota's going to throw their hat into the ring.
All right. And we know more of the specifics of the Sam Darnold deal. I think at this point that ended up being. What was that with Sam Darnold, real quick?
3 years, 100.5 million, I believe.
Yeah, I think the most interesting aspect is and we don't know the full layout of signing bonus or not, but I think the gist of it is that this is potentially a 1-year, $37.5 million contract. His APY is 33.5 million. The speculation is that there's an out for Seattle right after this season. As far as guaranteed money goes, no guaranteed money past the first season here. So, Darnold, this we'll have to wait to see if what the signing bonus structure is and all this overall. But the fact of the matter is that this is just a $33.5 million APY with $37.5 million guaranteed for this year.
Right. So that's the reporting. We'll see. I think Rodgers would come in around that average yearly value, seems to be the prevailing wisdom. But now we just sit and wait and keep sitting and keep waiting.
All right.
All right, Dave, let's talk Bengals receivers. No sitting and waiting for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. The Bengals locking up both their stud and star receivers at the same time, agreeing to terms last night. Chase becomes the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, topping the $40 million per year that Myles Garrett got. He's around $40.25 million per season. Crazy contract there. T. Higgins getting below that, $28.5 million per year. Incentives can push that up to $30 million per year, according to Fox Sports' Jordan Schultz, who broke that news himself late last night. And so Chase and Higgins will be facing the Steelers secondary for years to come.
A lot of people are wondering how the hell they did that, and does that mean the salary cap's a myth, and all that kind of stuff there. So here's the thing overall when it comes to the deals there. Both those guys were already on the books for enormous salary cap hits this offseason. These new deals will bring the salary cap number for both those players down considerably this year. So that's how they're able to do that this year, along with, didn't they already restructure the contract of Joe Burrow this offseason? I believe they did. Let me double check. Burrow, no, they have not. They have not done that yet with Burrow. I don't believe. He still looks like he's got a pretty hefty cap hit for this year. But the fact that they're going to be able to severely lower the cap charges on both that were on the books already for Chase and Higgins allows them to have workable cap space now. And now there's even speculation that maybe they can wind up getting something done with Trey Hendrickson. We'll see about that. But that's why they're able to do it. And as far as 2026 goes, yes, you're going to have monster cap hits right now on the board for Burrow, Higgins, and Jamar Chase, but you're probably going to be in a situation where you can restructure a couple of those guys to kick the cap can down the road a couple of more seasons there. Now, the big thing I think to watch from the Bengals specifically here is, well, first and foremost, I think the early layout on this is that Jamar Chase has reset the wide receiver market, correct?
Yes, very much so. He completely blew up the previous top value at Justin Jefferson at $35 million per year, getting over $40 million per year.
All right, and I think some of the early reporting also is that there's guaranteed money past the first year for him, which they can quantify that as well. He reset the market much in the same way, when you talk about what the Steelers did with T.J. Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick on their last deals. Remember, the Bengals, the Packers, and the Steelers are these teams that still consider to be in the dark ages where it comes to fully guaranteed money. Not injury guarantee, but fully guaranteed money past the first year. So I think Jamar Chase has finally been able to crack that. Well, I think Burrow obviously did that, but that that was a franchise quarterback market reset there. What's going to be the most interesting deal out of all these now is the T. Higgins, because obviously he did not reset the market. What does his did they give him any fully guaranteed money past 2025? And if they did, that is stop the presses when it comes to Cincinnati Bengals news. And now they open themselves, if indeed that happened, and it's not injury guarantees, if it indeed is fully guaranteed money past 2025, they're opening up the Pandora's box for future. Even Trey Hendrickson now, if he doesn't reset the market for a defensive play, for an edge rusher at this point. Now, his agent's going to be like, look here now. Look what you did with T. Higgins. He's not resetting the market, but you gave him fully guaranteed money past this year. We want a piece of that as well, too. So the most interesting thing here, I think, of all these contracts is what is the fully guaranteed money past this year in T. Higgins' contract. That's what I'm most looking for here.
Your look here now is not quite show me the money caliber of a line, but I like where your head is at there, Dave. According to Jordan Schultz, this is his tweet last night breaking the news that T. Higgins had the first 2 years of his contract guaranteed. Now, I don't know if that was maybe injury guarantee, but the wording seems to suggest the second year salary is fully guaranteed.
Well, a lot of times these things have been presented one way and they show up another way. So I reserve judgment until the full aspect of the contract is known.
Yeah, that's fair. Just the report from Schultz last night, and so we're gonna keep an eye on that. But either way, contracts aside, they're staying in Cincinnati for the long haul, which means Pittsburgh will be facing them twice a year for the long haul. So you have Porter at one corner spot. You better find that long-term solution at the other cornerback spot because you're gonna have to deal with these guys twice a season at least. And Pittsburgh's has had decent game plans against them overall, but you better, fight fire with fire. And Darius Slay, a fine signing. I'm good with it, but obviously a 1 year and short term signing, not the long term solution to Pittsburgh's cornerback spot opposite Porter.
Here's the other thing too, I guess, with Cincinnati is if you lose a guy like Trey Hendrickson now, you're already talking about a defense that had problems last year. You lose, arguably your best guy on defense. They better invest on. They better get the return out of Burrow, Higgins, and Jamar Chase because they're probably going to have to score some points over there. They obviously have a new defensive coordinator over there. I would imagine that they're going to be heavy in the draft on the defensive side of football when it comes to that. But they're going to have to grow up quick on the defensive side because they potentially could be in a lot of 35 to 31 games this season here. So that's probably the biggest concern when it comes to the Bengals dumping all this money on the offensive side of football. And then once again, we'll see what transpires here, whether or not they're able to get something done with Trey Hendrickson. If they lose him, that would be a huge blow. It goes without saying on the defensive side of football, and they obviously can't afford to lose their quarterback or either one of their wide receivers because they're going to have to put up points, and they're going to be a throwing team as well too. You don't pay those two guys that kind of money to have a heavy run based offense, right?
Sure. Yeah, they were a throwing team last year. They were in shootouts all last year. They won some, they lost some more, and that's why the Bengals did not make the playoffs. They better get that offensive line right too. They've had some issues, really building the trenches and protecting Burrow, and they're still not quite there on the tackles. Along the interior, we'll see how Mims develops, but Orlando Brown Jr. has been probably not exactly what they hope for. They better draft well too, because I think Mike Brown, besides maybe Hendrickson, he's done paying big money to anybody else for the time being.
I think it's kind of easy to map out what they're going to do in the draft. They're not going to draft a wide receiver. They re-up their tight end. They've got the quarterback situation. They need some offensive line help, and they need a whole bunch of help on the defensive side of football at various positions.
Right. But kudos to them. They spent the money. They typically don't. They're known for, Mike Brown is for being pretty penny pinching, and they certainly laid it all out to get Chase and Higgins done at the same time.
What do you think? The T. Higgins thing, once again, is the most interesting thing. And look, at some point, and we'll see what this, along with waiting one, obviously with the T. Higgins contract, I can't wait to see the DK Metcalf contract because his APY supposedly comes in higher than that of Higgins. And, you do wonder with a guy with an APY like that, what the fully guaranteed money is past the first year, and the Steelers will be opening themselves up for a can of worms as well too if they fully guaranteed money past 2025 for Metcalf because with him not resetting the market here. What's your bet on this? I'm betting that it's only injury guarantees and a hefty roster bonus for Metcalf, which is kind of virtually guaranteed as far part of his deal. We'll have a full post, and we might even have an emergency podcast if the Metcalf contract hits and he gets fully guaranteed money past 2025.
I'm sure this thought has kept you awake more than it has me, but I'll go with you, Dave. I'll trust you on that one. That they're not going to break their precedent for Metcalf.
And then once again, people seem to be confused the way some of these things laid out. When you see these original reports on players and guarantees, injury guarantee is different than fully guarantees. And the same goes for some roster bonus. Some roster bonuses at signing for the next year are fully guaranteed. Some aren't. So the devil's all in the details. And once again, the Steelers don't have a history except for top of the market players as far as guaranteeing money. And look, that they would be open once again. If they fully guarantee money for DK Metcalf past 2025, and especially with him being an outside player coming into the organization, they're setting themselves up for some interesting future conversations down the line with either free agents or whoever when it that are not top of the market players for guaranteed money past the first year of the contract.
Right. Remember, when it comes to the NFL, it's not like basically the other major sports, the NBA, the MLB, these contracts are not fully guaranteed in totality. They're guaranteed only in potential sections, in injury guarantees, and what the team designates as guaranteed money. And can you explain for those that don't know what injury guarantee means exactly? We hear that a lot, and that is often a number that fluffs up the total guarantees that can be misleading. What exactly does that mean for a player?
I'll have to give you Googled
Okay, because my understanding
explanation.
in a layman's sense, while you look that up, is basically if a player were to suffer a career-ending injury, something incredibly serious, that's almost an insurance policy for him should he have a, you know, again, career-altering type of injury where that kicks in only in that scenario.
Here is and you can find this at Football Operations website on guaranteed money, and they have breakdowns of several things here. You'll hear skill, cap, and injury and full are the four terms that you normally, when you get deep into this thing, if you study it, discussed and all. Skill guarantee if a player contract is terminated because, in the team's opinion, he does not have the requisite skill due to a loss or lack of skills comparable to others on the team at his position. The player will be entitled to any money that is protected by a skill guarantee. A cap guarantee if a player contract is terminated so that a team can get under the salary cap, sign a free agent, or re-sign one of its current players, the player is entitled to any money protected by a cap guarantee. An injury guarantee if a player is released but is currently unable to perform football duties, i.e., doesn't pass a physical as a result of team activities, he is entitled to any money in his contract protected against injury. Injury only guarantees is the most common partial guarantees. And then full guarantees is guaranteed at signing. Money is fully guaranteed at signing if guaranteed for skill, cap, and injury purposes. Deshaun Watson's 5-year, $230 million contract with the Browns is guaranteed for skill, cap, and injury. Most fully guaranteed money at signing was Deshaun Watson with the Browns at $230 million. So if you want to read all of what I just said there, go to the Football Operations website. You can see a breakdown of that. Normally, you don't get the numbers of like unless they're hit on someone like Aaron Wilson or Joel Corey. Actually, those are the kind of guys that get the full look at that thing listed in the NFLPA database and all like that. Unless you see those kind of things listed of skill and cap, the things that you're mostly looking for on our end that gets reported that we normally get to see is whether it's injury or full guarantees.
And I know for those full guarantees, that money is due up front for teams, right? That gets put into escrow. That's what
Right.
happened with Deshaun Watson, where that money has to go into an account somewhere and has to be, from a cash standpoint, has to be paid at signing.
Yeah. Now the you get into when the payout, when the time frame is another aspect of all
Yeah.
the that as well too. Is that going to be paid over 12 months, 18 months, whatever? But that's just another aspect of it. But a lot of people get caught up with the initial reporting of these contracts because they'll say guaranteed, and then come to find out, a huge portion of it in the second year, or even is injury guaranteed and not fully guaranteed. An agent's going to release what looks best out in public to these major media guys like Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and Pelissero and all these guys. They're just going to say it's guaranteed and not tell you whether or not it's injury or fully guaranteed along those lines.
Yeah, as you read off, injury guarantee, the most common guarantee. It's also the least likely to be attained. So I guess I was overstating a bit. You may not have to suffer a career altering injury, but if you had a serious injury that caused you to be released with a failed physical designation, that's when it would kick in. Although I imagine teams will just sometimes maybe just not designate it as such to avoid maybe paying that out. I don't know how all that works, but yeah, the injury guarantee portion is not very often actually realized.
Right.
All right, so there's your Cap 101 update for your Monday morning. All right, Dave, anything else to talk about? We do have our Steelers Depot draft profiles. We're doing small school week here at Steelers Depot, one of my favorite weeks of the year, highlighting prospects FBS or below the FBS level, FCS Division 2, even Division 3. I was in some Middlebury College tape over the weekend, Dave, for Thomas Perry. He was at
Bless your
the
heart.
Shrine Bowl, and it's hard to find Middlebury tape. You'd be surprised by that, but it's out there, and we're combing on through it. So we got some profiles up today on Robert McDaniel from Jackson State, one of the top HBCU prospects. Good tape out there. And Jonathan, a local Iowa man, Iowa Western quarterback Hunter Decker. So profile on him. He was at Iowa State initially and then transferred down. We got a bunch more small school guys to look at throughout this week.
All right, I like transition. How many profiles do we have up on the site now?
We are over 200 and counting.
Over 200. All right. Good job to the guys. They are plowing through these. We got a why don't you rattle off the guys the guys getting this work done. Give them a shout out.
Yeah, we should, and it's just been great, consistent work, and everyone's really, just worked on their own, and we have a good system, and it's very much hands off. So let me just pull up the entire list here, so I don't miss anybody. Of course, there are the core and the people that you probably know and hear from on the podcast: Josh Carney and Ross McCorkle and Joe Clark, but also Jonathan Heitrader, our lead draft man. I'll have Stephen Pavelka, Ephraim Geller, Jim Hester. Nate Costco and Jake Brockhoff, and so the whole team's done a great job. We have it's well over 200 right now, and we should be on pace to beat last year's number of 300 something profiles. So ideally, we'll have a profile on every single Steelers draft pick the moment that the card gets turned in.
That's the hope. All right, good job, guys. Appreciate that. All right, where else should we go? Is there anything left here?
That's all I got. If you want to add anything else, Dave, feel free. If not, you can get to some read emails and close out today's show. No live stream tonight. That's part of our normal schedule, but I always give that disclaimer on Monday for those who want to make sure they are in the loop.
All right, let's get to the email machine here. We'll start with let's start backwards this time. See if we missed anything. Dave Rudden writes in, while the jury might still be out on a long term on the performance of Omar Khan, is it fair to say that Omar has lost some of his early luster, even cachet, when Steeler fans lovingly embrace him as the con artist, getting JPJ out of a trade for Claypool, etc. Now, after losing out in the wide receiver sweepstakes last year and the team suffering for it, and this year the same could be said for quarterback and perhaps even defensive line, with the team missing out time and time again, does Khan need another steal of a move to restore his reputation?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime there's that new hire, that honeymoon period comes in, even for somebody like Khan, who had been working in Pittsburgh since, as he would say, Valentine's Day 2001. I'll let the whole offseason play out to judge it, or at least the bulk of it through the draft. And there's always an element of, drafting and then developing, and he's less about the developing side of things. That's a coaching thing, more so than identifying talent and bringing guys in through the acquisition process. So, yeah, I mean, I just to try to give a normal answer, it's probably not the fanfare he got early on probably hasn't matched the results, but all that matters is, especially for this year, is just what do you do on the field. If you have a great season, if you go on a run, if you however you do that, then you're regarded as a really good GM. If not, then you're not. And so it's all results based. But I still think, to judge the rookie class, you still want to see how the young guys do. You've had some injuries there. They certainly have hit on some draft picks. I still think they've drafted reasonably well under Omar Khan, but there's still time to evaluate those picks.
Right. And obviously big third seasons coming up for several players such as Benton and Joey Porter Jr., and you're hoping that the offensive linemen that you drafted these last couple of years come into their own this year. And the all-important quarterback position, we're still waiting to see how that plays out on top of it there. So, to be determined. I get the overall gist of the email of has he lost some of his cachet, if you will, up until this point. And look, the whole organization right now, until this team hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. That's the big albatross around the organization's neck right now. And you know, uh, no matter how good of moves that you make and signings and all like that, if you're not in the playoffs winning playoff games, it's all a failure, right?
Exactly, that's the goal, and if you don't reach it, then everyone takes the blame for it, and rightfully so. So to answer that last part of the question, does Khan need another steal of a move? I wouldn't say he needs it. I wouldn't turn it down either, but it's more about can these young guys develop? And I think specifically, as you referenced, Dave, the offensive line. Now, again, that's not a Khan thing. That becomes the coaching staff. That's their job to do. But Khan's theory, and I think Andy Weidel played a role in it as well, was build up the trenches, get this offensive line better, make heavy investments up front, and that'll make the whole offense go in that Eagle style model. And so, how well Jones plays this year in year 3, how good Fautanu looks in year number 2, his first really year after missing this rookie season. The progression of Mason McCormick will really dictate, you know, Khan's plan and how well that's got put in action. Of let's invest heavily in the offensive line. If they can develop those guys, create a top 10 offensive line, it'll feel like a success. It will be a success. If not, it'll be a failure, and the whole idea of how they were building this team will kind of go up in smoke.
All right, agreed. Let's see here if we can go to another one down in the database here. Matthew Sutton. Oh, I think we hit this one, didn't we? I was wondering a recent trade compares. Okay, he says, I was wondering, this is from Matthew Sutton. I was wondering if the recent trade for DK Metcalf compares in any way to the 1996 draft day trade for Jerome Bettis. Did it seem as such a bold move as this year's trade? Both players were acquired for second round picks with the later round picks involved. Not sure if the contract impact on the roster can be compared considering the 30-year age difference in the age of trades. Wouldn't it be nice if this trade works out as well for the Steelers as Bettis trade did approximately 30 years ago? Well, first and foremost, Bettis was on a rookie deal, right? At the time. And obviously, I mean, I don't even know that it's happened so many years ago in the game. Obviously, it's changed considerably since then. Was it, I guess, from a stop the presses type standpoint? I'm trying to remember what even, I mean, you're talking about different general manager and all back in those days. I just from the stop the presses type standpoint, yeah, it was a big deal, but I really think that's where it all ends at that point, because you had a player, young player still under his rookie contract and not a good fit in Los Angeles and the coaching staff at that time. And whereas you got a Metcalf who's a veteran, proven player, and plus you had to, upon getting him in the door, you had to pay him a lot of money. So I don't know if there's a lot of comparisons outside of it just being a big deal at the time that the Steelers doing such a thing.
I mean, I get the parallels there. Maybe the question was centered as, was the Metcalf deal as surprising as the Bettis deal was in terms of, whoa, did not expect Pittsburgh to make that kind of an aggressive move for a player?
And once again, I'm trying to think about, what precedent was at the time.
I mean, and Pittsburgh does not have a large history of these kind of big time trades, and so I imagine there wasn't a heavy precedent for that at the time. I just don't. I was 3, so I don't remember the reaction
Yeah.
in terms of what and obviously social media didn't exist, and so it's harder to probably capture the feeling of the trade. I imagine it was probably pretty similar though in terms of the kind of whoa factor of we just got this guy we did not expect to get.
Yeah, I mean, I get once again, I get the gist of all of it. I'm trying to remember back to even, it's so hard. I mean, I had to go back in the annals to remember how big a deal maybe that potentially was at the time.
Yeah, I couldn't answer that, but I bet you there's again some parallels there.
All right, Anthony writes in, this is the year to tank for the Steelers. They are in the quarterback desert with no oasis in sight. They should tank this year, get the best pick they can, and with the extra picks they will have due to the free agency loss, draft a quarterback out there. What are your guys' thoughts? I mean, I understand the sentiment overall, but I mean, you're talking about an organization that's not going to purposely tank. So, I mean, other than just throwing it out there as I would like to see them that be the result. That's where it is because they're not going to do that.
Yeah, so I missed the question. It was about
About
tanking.
tanking, yeah.
Yeah, this is
Because they don't have a
deep.
quarterback and because of the extra picks, coming compensatory and all like that. I mean, I understand in theory the the reason for the email and all, but asking for the Steelers to tank and getting them to tank just isn't going to happen.
Yeah, it's not in their DNA to tank. And again, the reason why they're aggressive is because they're trying to win with this defense before it ages out of Hayward, of Watt, as Minka gets close to being 30. And so they're trying to capture this window, right or wrong. You can disagree with it, and that's fine. But that is why they're continuing to make these tweaks and moves around the edges more so than blowing this thing up. And it's just also not their DNA to do that. And, in fairness to them, they're already under some pressure, at least from the fan base, for not winning a playoff game. Can you imagine what the sentiment will be like if this team wins 3 games and just has a miserable season on top of not winning a playoff game since 2016? Yes, there'll be some upside to maybe getting that potential high pick and a quarterback, and there could be some value in that. But this is not a team that wants to go through that, considering they're already under the microscope for being unsuccessful and getting over the hump so far.
Right.
Like coaches get fired when that happens.
Right.
Like it's easy to think about, okay, let's just tank and blow the team up, but players lose jobs. Coaches, Tomlin won't lose his job, but assistants will lose their job. Coordinators will lose their job. No one wants to come in and tank. That's not no one wants to have a bad season and let the next guy take over for them. So it's easy to think about that from a big picture view, from an ownership standpoint. What I would do, or in practical terms, no team is intentionally trying to suck so they can get fired.
All right. Nathan Casey writes in, wide receiver market impact on George Pickens. With the Bengals wide receiver contracts done, it is clear GP won't take less than $29 million per year, he says. To me, that means 2 things. He isn't going to be happy. 1, risking the health this year on his rookie contract. He has in parentheses, think James Daniels. 2, playing in a very run-heavy, multiple tight end offense next to an AAV wide receiver of $30 million per year who will get a fair amount of targets. Doesn't that mean the Steelers need to trade him before he becomes a problem and tanks his value? Wouldn't getting what you can now before the draft be smart? He says, call the Raiders about GP and our third for their second and the fourth. He says it just seems like waiting it out is a pie in the sky attitude with significant downside. All right. Obviously, something that's going to that continues to be the topic of conversation. Will George Pickens get a contract this offseason? I don't think he will. And the second would be, if he's not going to get a deal, would you consider trading him? If you trade him and you don't have anybody opposite DK Metcalf, you're back in the same kind of can of worms that you were in last season. You got one good wide receiver, you got nobody to compliment him, and what have you done? The second thing is George Pickens is going to stare at that $30 million number that DK Metcalf supposedly has. He's going to want his handout this offseason, and especially on the heels of seeing what happened to Chase and Higgins. He can put his hand out all he wants unless he's going to be willing to settle for a below market deal with no guaranteed past the first year. he's not going to get a deal. The only way the Steelers will sign him is if he says, you know what, give me 24, 25 million for this season. No guarantees past this year. I'll lock myself up for 5 years and I'll go about my business. I have problems thinking that that's going to be his train of thought, especially if he keeps his nose clean, goes out and has whatever good a season, whatever the byproduct of the offense is. He just does his job, stays healthy, and then the Steelers decide not to franchise tag him next year. He hits free agency as the main prize. Potentially, he has a shot at getting even closer or exceeding the $40 million and resetting the market that way. So, as Alex and I have talked about, the only way now I think at this point you see GP getting traded is if he just comes to the organization and says, I want out of here. I'm going to be a problem if I'm not. I'm going to be on social media every other day, yada, yada. Get me out of here. Or if the Steelers in the next several weeks or whatnot make somewhat of a move at a wide receiver that at least helps minimize a loss of George Pickens, and then you trade him that way before the draft. And as far as the contract goes, unless he takes below market value and full guarantees only in 2025, that's the only way I can see a deal get done.
Or I would say that a third scenario, if some team calls and just bowls Pittsburgh over with some sort of crazy pie in the sky, can't refuse offer, because I'm sure teams will be checking in and calling, and are probably already have, to see Pickens' situation after the Metcalf move. So unless Pickens forces their hands, I think Pittsburgh will hold on for that unique chance to have Pickens and Metcalf and really revamp this offense and be as explosive and potent as possible. I know that, yes, if you traded Pickens for a draft pick, you could use that draft pick to draft a receiver and help replace him that way. But if you do sign Aaron Rodgers, he does not typically play well with rookies, and those guys have a hard time seeing the field. There's a high standard, going to be buttoned up, and so that rookie may not make that immediate impact and leave Pittsburgh in a similar spot as Stateside settled to Pickens being the only guy last year. In this case, Metcalf would be in that role. So I understand the thought. I think he would listen to calls, but I think Pittsburgh wants to have as much offensive firepower as possible. That Pickens and Metcalf to be one of the top duos in the league, this great deep threat that can change how defenses structure them and play more too high and soften up the box for the run game and open up middle of the field, all that kind of stuff. I think it's what Pittsburgh wants to do to really try to push this offense to have its best season since 2018.
Yep, well put. All right, here's a shout out to Russell Mocha in Ravens country, Baltimore, Maryland. He's the one that wrote in, put on that we mentioned earlier, put on your tinfoil hat, Dave and Alex. I have a theory. The Steelers were going to keep Larry Ogunjobi and only released him after they found out about his upcoming suspension. Maybe that's why they were so inept to sign high defensive lineman at the start of free agency. And once again, we addressed that at the top of the show there, and I understand the theory and the reasoning behind such a question at that, but there's no way of really knowing for sure if that's the way things transpired. My thought has been all along that even before this suspension, that they were going to dump him before paying him that roster bonus.
Yeah, kind of addressed that earlier. But by the way, just speaking of contracts, I should mention Derek Stingley. The Texans reset the cornerback market $30 million per year. If Porter were to play well this year in 2025 and want to get paid for 2026, the cornerback market just got a lot hotter.
And that was due for kind of a reset for that position group, especially on the heels of what we've seen go on with the wide receiver market and all like that. So you're gonna, Sauce Gardner's probably having a nice day today because he's due, and I think in another cornerback or two that's due to get paid. But
Trent McDuffie,
yeah, okay. The Texans said we're going to get out in front of this thing before it goes too crazy, because it was quite a jump from the contract signed. Who was the guy that just signed free agency just this past week? That was a huge bump.
J.C. Horn of the Panthers
Right.
got $25 million per year a week or two ago, and then Stingley blows that out of the water.
Right.
Just in the way that
So
Garrett blew out Max Crosby.
right. So kind of due for a reset there.
It is interesting. We're kind of seeing these big jumps at topping the market, not just topping the market by getting 0.1 million, 100,000
Right.
more than the other guy. We're seeing Garrett get over 5 million more than Crosby. We're seeing Chase get more than 5 million more than Jefferson. We're seeing Stingley get 5 million more than the last guy. Now, some of these are more depressed markets that didn't have movement for a while, like at receiver, like at edge. So that may be a byproduct of that cap going up. But we're seeing teams, when they reset the market, they reset it in a pretty emphatic fashion.
Yeah, and also coming out of COVID and the uncertainty, I guess, and the borrowing of the future year's cap money, and finally getting all past that, the jump that the cap made this year. I think all of it's kind of relative and intertwined, if you will.
Real quick, does TJ Watt's extension jump to Mark Chase's extension?
I tell you, you keep looking at the non-quarterback number, right? You do have to wonder with these guys. The defense wants it back on side of the defensive player. Everybody wants to not only be the top at their position, but they want to reset the top of the non-quarterback market.
Right now, Chase only barely bumped up Garrett by I think $250,000 or so, but still bumped him. And I think Watt's standpoint will be, let's top that too.
I am not going to rule it out. I know people don't want to hear that, but
if you're Pittsburgh in the precedent structure, you are kind of compelled to do that. Otherwise, you break your precedent, and you break that for every other extension from here on out.
Right. So be prepared. That's all I got to say there. Okay, we're about an hour and a half in. I think we got through a lot of the emails here, so I guess we can close out the show and get back after it on Wednesday.
All right, sounds good. We'll talk to you then.
All right. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter/X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex Kozora at Alex Kozora or at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. A lot of great emails coming in. If you want to donate to the site, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button, upper right navigational bar. Also, if you'd like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com, hit the ad-free button, upper right navigational bar. Follow the directions that way. Who was I going to? I'll save it for. I got another defensive lineman I got my eye on, maybe in free agency. We'll talk about on the Wednesday show. Remind me to talk about that here if nothing happens here. Until Wednesday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.